It was one of those evenings when the sky looked too quiet, when even the wind seemed to move slower, like the whole world had gone still just to listen to your heartbeat. I remember sitting on the edge of the couch, holding a little collar in my hands. It still smelled faintly like her, like the shampoo I used when I gave her a bath, like the grass she used to roll in after the rain. Her name was Daisy, and she wasn't just a pet. She was a part of my days, the rhythm of my mornings, the warmth that filled the house when I came home. And now she was gone. I thought I was ready for it. I thought I could be strong. But when I saw that empty spot where her bed used to be, my strength left me all at once. It felt like the air had been taken out of the room. I sat there staring at the little space, wondering how something so small could leave such a huge hole in a heart. I had cried until I couldn't anymore, and still, the ache wouldn't leave. I looked at the collar again, my hands trembling, and that's when the question slipped out of me unplanned, raw and desperate. Lord, do animals go to heaven? It wasn't something I'd ever thought deeply about before. Life had always been too busy, too noisy to make room for questions like that. But that night, when all the noise was gone, when I felt the silence press against my chest, that was all I could think about. I didn't want theological answers or verses quoted from memory. I wanted to know if Daisy's tail would wag again, if those eyes that looked at me with such trust could ever look at me again. As I sat there in that fragile moment, my mind drifted through memories, how she'd wait by the window every evening until I returned, how she'd nudge my hand when I was sad, how she'd rest her head on my lap, like she understood everything without needing to say a word. There was something holy in that kind of love, something so pure and gentle that it didn't seem possible for it to just end. I thought about how God made her, how he crafted every living thing with such care, how every heartbeat, even the smallest one, carried a spark of his breath. Could that spark ever truly go out? The thought lingered and twisted in my heart, filling me with both longing and confusion. I looked up at the ceiling as if heaven was somewhere above the roof, as if maybe my question could rise past the clouds and reach his ears. I didn't expect an answer, I just needed to ask it. I needed him to hear that I was broken, that this small creature's absence had torn something deeper in me than I ever imagined. I whispered her name again, and for a moment I thought about how strange it was that something without words could teach me so much about love. Daisy never spoke, but she understood kindness, patience, forgiveness. She forgave me when I was short-tempered, loved me when I was tired, and waited for me even when I didn't deserve it. Isn't that the kind of love God asks from us? If love is eternal, then how could hers end? That thought stirred something inside me, a fragile hope, a quiet wondering if maybe God's heaven wasn't just a place for souls that could speak or reason, but for every piece of love he ever created. I closed my eyes and let the question repeat in my mind, not as a plea anymore, but as a heartbeat echoing in the silence. Somewhere deep down, I felt that the question itself was an act of faith, that in asking, I was already reaching toward an answer that I wasn't ready to hear yet. That night after I whispered the question, I sat there for a long time, surrounded by a silence that didn't feel empty, but almost alive, like something was waiting with me. I had no words left, only thoughts that came and went like waves. I remember how the lamp beside me flickered softly, how the shadows on the wall seemed to move in rhythm with my breathing. I folded my hands together without even realizing it, not in a formal prayer, but in that instinctive way you do when you're reaching for something greater than yourself. My eyes closed and I let the quiet hold me. I didn't know what I was expecting. I wasn't waiting for a voice from the heavens or some miraculous sign. I just needed peace, even a small one, something that could wrap around the ache that was still pulsing inside me. I started to speak without meaning to. just softly, almost whispering my thoughts as if I were talking to an old friend. I told him how I missed her, how I didn't know what to do with all the love that had nowhere to go now. I told him how strange it felt to see her toys still lying by the door, her bowl still in the corner, her leash hanging where it always had. Everything in the house looked the same, but everything felt different. I said, Lord, you said you care for every sparrow that falls. You know when each one takes its last breath. So how could you not care for her too? My words trembled as I said them, but I didn't hold back. There was no one else to hear me except him. As I sat in that quiet space, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was soft, like a light being turned on behind a curtain. My tears slowed, and a stillness began to settle over me. Not the kind of stillness that comes from exhaustion, but one that feels almost sacred. I could feel something deeper than comfort, something I couldn't name. It wasn't an answer in words, but a presence that felt closer than breath, like a hand gently resting on my shoulder. It felt like he was saying, I am here. And for a moment that was enough. The more I sat in that stillness, the more I began to sense that prayer wasn't about asking for explanations, but about allowing myself to be understood. God already knew my pain before I could describe it. He knew the way my heart hurt when I passed by the park where Daisy used to run, the way I hesitated to open the door when I came home to silence, and in that deep knowing he was already answering me. I began to realize that sometimes his answers don't come as words, they come as peace, as a warmth that fills the hollow spaces where grief tries to live. As I breathed in, I could almost feel the weight of loss loosening, like he was gently lifting it away piece by piece. I thought about how strange it was that silence could speak louder than words, that a quiet moment in the dark could hold so much meaning. It was then I started to understand that maybe heaven wasn't just somewhere far away. Maybe heaven was the presence I was feeling right there, the love that never left, the connection that couldn't be broken by death. I sat there, hands still clasped, heart still trembling, realizing that my prayer wasn't a question anymore. It had turned into a conversation that didn't need words, only trust. As I sat in that stillness, something began to stir inside me that I couldn't explain. It was like a soft whisper moving through my heart, not in words, but in understanding. I didn't hear a voice, yet I knew something was being spoken to me, something gentle and alive. It was as if heaven was leaning close, answering not with explanations, but with love itself. I could feel the peace deepen, spreading through my chest like warm light. My tears had dried, but they left behind a kind of clarity, a still awareness that I wasn't alone. In that quiet, I felt the truth begin to unfold, not through logic or scripture, but through something deeper, the language of love that doesn't need sound to be heard. It was then that I realized what God was showing me. I had always imagined heaven as a place of reward, a place for souls who believed, a paradise built on faith and forgiveness. But that night, it became clear to me that heaven isn't just a destination for people. It's the completion of love. Everything that was ever touched by true love, everything that was ever created in love, carries within it a spark of the divine. When God said, I am love, he meant it in a way we can barely understand. If God is love and all love comes from him, then nothing born of love can ever be lost. Daisy's love wasn't human, but it was pure. It wasn't reasoned or spoken, but it was real. And anything real and good and loving can't simply vanish when life ends. It must return to the source that made it. I thought about the way she used to look at me, those deep, knowing eyes that spoke without words. There was no selfishness in them, no pride or pretense, just simple, unconditional affection. It was the kind of love that asked for nothing but presence, the kind of love that forgave before you apologized, That's what made me understand maybe animals love the way God intended us to love. Maybe their innocence is closer to heaven than we realize. And if heaven is a place without loss, without tears, without separation, then how could it ever be complete if that kind of love were missing? I felt God reminding me that His creation wasn't divided into worthy and unworthy, that He had declared everything He made as good. The same hands that shaped humanity also shaped the creatures that fill our lives with joy. The same breath that gave Adam life gives life to every beating heart, no matter how small. I thought of how He watched the sparrow, how He spoke through a donkey, how the lion will one day lie down with the lamb. The Bible is filled with moments where God's care touches the animal world, not as decoration to our story, but as participants in His great plan of life and love. That realization made me feel smaller, but in a beautiful way, as if I had been reminded that I'm part of something vast, something connected, something eternal. The answer I was receiving wasn't just about whether Daisy would be waiting for me beyond this life. It was about understanding the very heart of God. His love isn't selective. It doesn't stop at the edges of humanity. It fills everything, breathes through everything, sustains everything. And if His love is truly everlasting, then everything that carries His love must also continue. It isn't a matter of logic, it's a matter of His nature. Love doesn't end because God doesn't end. And somehow in that moment, I knew that nothing good or pure or loving is ever truly gone. The more I sat with that understanding, the more the pieces began to fit together in my heart. I began to realize that heaven, in its truest form, isn't just a reward for human souls, but the perfect expression of God's nature. It's not a place of separation, it's a place of wholeness. Everything that reflects His love must have a place within it. If heaven is the fullness of God's presence, then it cannot lack anything that carries His imprint of love. That's when I understood that Daisy's existence, her gentle spirit, her quiet joy were not small or insignificant. They were a reflection of the Creator's own tenderness, a glimpse of His affection shown in fur and heartbeat. Heaven wouldn't be complete without her, because heaven is completeness itself, and love is the thread that ties it all together. I thought about the way God created the world, how He looked upon every living thing and called it good. He didn't say that only some were worthy of His care. He took time to make them all, to give them beauty and purpose. And when I remembered that, it became hard to believe that such care would end in nothingness. The same God who placed a soul within me surely placed something sacred within them too, something eternal. The thought filled me with a quiet awe. I began to see that heaven's perfection isn't measured by golden streets or shining gates, but by the wholeness of love that can never be divided or lost. If I could love Daisy so deeply, how much more must the one who created her love her still? As I reflected on that, I felt a wave of peace that was almost too gentle to notice at first. It was as though heaven had brushed against my spirit, reminding me that eternity isn't a distant promise, it's already in motion. Every act of love we give, every bond that reflects God's kindness is already a part of that eternal story. The way Daisy loved me with patience and joy was not a small thing, it was a holy thing. It was love in its purest form, unfiltered by ego or expectation. That love was never meant to end. It was meant to return to the one who first gave it. I started to see that death wasn't an ending, but a doorway, a shift in how love exists. The physical body may fade, but the love that was shared, the connection that was formed, remains alive in God's memory, which never forgets. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that heaven's perfection depends on that truth, on the restoration of all that was good and lost. A heaven without the creatures that taught us how to love, forgive, and find joy in the smallest moments would feel incomplete. God doesn't create emptiness, He fills it. He doesn't separate what love has joined, He redeems it. I looked around my quiet home again and saw everything differently. The leash by the door no longer looked like a symbol of absence but of promise. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It felt full, as if heaven itself was near. I could almost feel Daisy's spirit close, not gone, just beyond the veil, held by the same hands that hold me. That realization didn't erase the grief, but it changed it. It became softer, lighter, almost sacred, as if even the ache in my chest had been transformed into something holy, a reminder that love, in all its forms, is eternal. From that night forward, something inside me was different. I carried the same memories, but they no longer felt like weights pressing down on my heart. They became something else, almost like gentle lights, small reminders that love never truly dies, it just changes its form. I began to see life through a softer lens where everything, even loss, held a trace of grace. I realized that faith isn't just about believing in heaven after death. It's about recognizing heaven in the moments where love refuses to be silenced. That understanding began to color everything I did. When I walked past the park where Daisy used to run, I didn't feel the same ache. I felt gratitude for having known such pure affection. And in that gratitude, I sensed God smiling through the breeze, as if saying, "This is what love was meant to teach you." I found myself paying attention in new ways, to the way birds sang early in the morning, to the way sunlight filtered through the trees, to the way small creatures carried life so effortlessly. Every living thing became a reflection of divine craftsmanship, a reminder that God's creativity was still unfolding in front of me. I stopped trying to understand love only as an emotion and began to see it as a presence, something sacred and alive. It moved through the world like air, unseen, but always felt. It was in the wag of a tail, in the purr of a cat, in the laughter of a child, in the kindness of a stranger. Everywhere I looked, I saw small traces of heaven peeking through the ordinary. My faith grew quieter but deeper. I didn't need proof or signs anymore. I had already felt the truth settle into me that night. The way God had answered me wasn't through a miracle or a vision. It was through understanding. And understanding brought peace, not because it solved everything, but because it made everything sacred. I started to believe that maybe the greatest miracles aren't the ones that change our circumstances, but the ones that change how we see them. Daisy's absence had once felt unbearable, but now it became a bridge between this world and the next. Through her, I had glimpsed a piece of eternity, something untouched by death or time. Whenever someone asked me if I believed animals go to heaven, I would smile, not with certainty from doctrine, but with conviction from experience. I would tell them that I believe love has no boundaries, and heaven could never be smaller than the love that shaped our lives. If God could use a small creature to show me patience, comfort, and joy, then how could He ever let that love disappear? It became clear that the story of salvation was never just about humanity. It was about restoration, about God making all things new. And all things truly meant all. Even now, when I think about that night, I don't think of it as the night I lost Daisy. I think of it as the night God opened my eyes. The night He showed me that faith isn't only found in church pews or whispered prayers. It's found in every act of love that mirrors His own. I began to carry that lesson quietly in how I treated people, in how I cared for the world around me, in how I listened more gently to the hearts that were hurting. Because once you've seen love through God's eyes, you can't go back to seeing it as small or temporary. You begin to understand that every creature, every heartbeat, every bond born from love carries a reflection of forever within it.